So the final lesson then on attachment for this year is going to look at the influence of childhood attachment on adult relationships. So what attachment you develop in your infancy will have or won't have an impact on your adult relationships. It's all based around the idea of an internal working model. And if you remember, this was created by John Bowlby and linked to the continuity hypothesis, that your relationship with your primary attachment giver acts as a template for all future relationships that you have. So if you're in a loving relationship with your, let's say, mother as an infant, then you're going to assume that's how all relationships should be later on in life. You're going to seek out functional relationships, you're going to behave functionally within them. However, if you had a bad experience in your first attachment with your primary attachment figure, then that's going to impact your later relationships. You're going to struggle to form relationships, you're going to behave inappropriately during those relationships as well. You're going to be controlling, you're not going to be as involved as you should be, you might not be able to show and express your love as much as you should in a relationship either. So the internal working model is the basis for how it affects your adult relationships. So we're going to look firstly at the effect of childhood attachment on childhood friendships. So Kearns did a study where he found that securely attached infants were far more likely to have the best quality childhood friendships, whereas insecure children suffered from friendship difficulties. So clearly, the attachment you have in your infancy is likely to affect your childhood friendships as well. Wilson Smith also conducted a study with 196 children from London and found that securely attached infants were very unlikely to be involved in bullying. They were not unlikely to be a bully or a victim of bullying as well. Whereas insecure avoidant children were far more likely to be the victims of bullying. And insecure resistant children were far more likely to be bullies themselves. So these two studies clearly show that those initial 2.5 years, that attachment that you develop with your primary caregiver has a significant impact on not only your childhood friendships, but also down to bullying as well. And for some of you, this may explain a lot. It's also going to affect your adult romantic relationship, so the love you experience later on in life. The most famous study here is by Hazen and Shaver and their love quiz study. What they did was they got 620 replies from a love quiz in an American magazine. And in this love quiz, there were 3 different sections. One section looked at your current or most important relationship in your life. Second section looked at your general love experiences, and the third section tried to work out your attachment type. And they did that by giving 3 different statements, and you had to say which one applied most to you. And the findings of this study showed that securely attached infants had good, long-lasting romantic relationships, and that they had a positive internal working model and a positive outlook on love. They believed in love, they believed they could express love as well. Whereas avoidant infants were far more jealous and had a fear of intimacy, and even doubted the existence of love itself. So you can see again, those initial 2.5 years, the attachment you develop can have significant impacts on the adult romantic relationships you're going to have later on in life. It may also result in poor parenting, and we've already had a look previously when we did the effects of institutions on Quinton and his study. The fact that 50 mothers who were raised in institutions didn't develop an internal working model. While they were in the institution, they didn't develop that positive internal working model that they required. And as a result, they didn't have a reference point to work from when they were parents themselves. And it resulted in them lacking warmth and also their children potentially spending more time in care. So it can also have an effect on your parenting skills later on in life. So now we're going to have a look at the AO3 and evaluative points for this particular theory. And the first thing we're going to look at is the fact that it's all based on correlational data. Okay, so all the conclusions drawn from the studies, whether it be on childhood friendships, whether it be on your parenting skills or adult romantic relationships, are all based on correlational data. So we can't reliably establish cause and effect between early attachment and later relationships. There could be many other factors that have played a difference. For example, the temperament hypothesis. Some children were more likely to have better adult romantic relationships because they have a nicer personality. Okay, so there might be other factors that have an effect on the results other than just early attachment. So temperament, for example, could explain issues good or bad with the relationships later on in life. Another issue with this theory is that the studies are also based on retrospective data. And by that we mean we're asking people to recall information from early on in their lives to assess their attachment. And the data from that's obviously going to be flawed because memories of the past aren't always accurate. In addition to this, people may have forgotten certain things or over-exaggerate certain incidents from their childhood. And it also relies on participants being honest and having a realistic view of their infancy, which I've asked you lot to remember maybe back to the first 5 years of your life. It's an exceptionally difficult task to do. So the data is going to be slightly flawed when we're using retrospective interviews or data collection methods. And also, the studies haven't used or haven't been able to use the most common method of measuring attachment. They haven't used a strange situation because they haven't used them as infants. So therefore, the data is always going to be slightly flawed. And therefore, the whole study or the studies lack internal validity because they might not actually be measuring attachment in a valid way. Another issue with this theory is that it is a determinist theory. And by this I mean it states that your early attachment determines your later life experiences. So it states that your early attachment has a fixed effect on your adult relationships. So for example, it states that if you have an insecure attachment at the age 1, you are doomed to have unsatisfactory adult relationships later on in life. And obviously that's not the case. It might happen for some people, but it's not going to happen for everyone. There are going to be other things that have an effect. Many participants in the studies have shown that if they have an insecure attachment at age 1, they can go on and have happy adult relationships as well. In all the studies, there are people who do go on to have happy relationships later on in life. Okay, these theories often ignore something called individual differences. The fact that different people are different. Some people it will affect, some people it won't affect.